The Houston Jane Doe 2022, identified as Miranda Rodriguez. Miranda Rodriguez was just 24 when she disappeared right before Hurricane Harvey was due to arrive in August of 2017. Her disappearance was from her home in Houston, Texas. Miranda had made plans to go stay with her parents and to wait out the hurricane with them at their home. The plan she had made was to meet her father at an agreed-upon spot. However, Amanda never arrived as planned and was never seen again. As a result, Miranda's family had been frantically trying to find her ever since. They did everything they could to try to find some sort of hope to hold on to, and this went on for almost 6 years. And now, unfortunately, there's no more hope to hold on to. It would take 1 year after the Jane Doe was found in order to identify her, but by this time, when she was first found, 5 years had passed. A family lived on Peach Creek Drive in Houston, and they would report that they had cleaned out their barbecue pit, and they were shocked because inside was something they never expected: skeletal remains. This was in July of 2022. By this time, Miranda had been missing for 5 years. So for understandable reasons, it never occurred to anyone that this could be the missing person, Miranda Rodriguez. And even more confusing is that she didn't know anyone at that address. There is no link to the address at all that could be found. The house itself wasn't even close to her home, although they would note that she had relatives who lived about 5 minutes away. Without genetic genealogy, Miranda would still be a missing person. And what is so amazing about this is, despite being in a barbecue pit, they were still able to get usable DNA from her remains. So right now, they just desperately need someone to come forward with information on this case to give both Miranda and her family the justice that they deserve. If you don't want your name included in any of this, please just give an anonymous tip. Miranda Rodriguez was a missing person for 6 years, and an unidentified Jane Doe for 1. Had she lived the life she deserved, Miranda would be 30 years old today. The Berrien County John Doe, identified as Jeremiah Garretson. Some of these stories get to you a little bit more, or at least they do me, than some others, and this is one of those. It started when a 911 call came in on March 4th, 2019. Remains had been found on Ed Lindsay Road in Lenox, Georgia. The remains were found inside of a pond, and it was determined that he'd passed from accidental drowning. They were able to obtain fingerprints, but no matches were found. Thankfully, in newer Doe cases, they move a little bit faster, and it was the GBI and Tatham labs that began testing. They had been moving wider and wider with missing person reports, but nothing matched. They also enlisted my favorite forensic artist, Kelly Lawson, to recreate what he may have looked like. But with this, they had a dead end. The man who was found had on many layers of clothing, which is common if someone is without a home to store their belongings in. They often just wear multiple layers. He was wearing Georgia Tech pajama pants, camel pattern pants, a brown and black belt with a yellow metal buckle, a green jacket, a white, red, and blue Bulls sleeveless jersey, green sweatshirt, and that had a white logo on it. He had on mismatched socks, gray pajama shorts, gray boxer briefs, a gray short-sleeved t-shirt, and a camo-designed head neck gaiter. Perhaps even more sad and definitely more humanizing is his jewelry. He had on a yellow metal angel pin and a green and tan Soldier of God plastic bracelet. The prints would eventually come back to a 36-year-old man named Jeremiah Garretson. From what I can tell, Jeremiah wasn't reported missing, but this is one that makes me wish I had a bigger picture. I believe I found his Facebook, but it doesn't have any photos of the person it belongs to, and the post hadn't been active since 2012. What's sad is he was from Nashville, Georgia, which is only 14 miles away from Lenox. We know he graduated in 2014 from the Wiregrass, Georgia Technical College, and this is of course in the same general area too. So something must have happened between the photos that we have here and whatever changed in his life after he graduated from college. From the recreation, it's clear his hair had receded, so likely a bit of time had passed. And here's why this one bothers me. It looks pretty likely that he was homeless, so maybe he wasn't around for photos, and maybe the ones provided came from a college roommate. It doesn't really say, but it's entirely possible he doesn't have family. And I want to be clear, I am not accusing anyone in his family of doing anything wrong or not reporting him missing. When people are homeless, often they sort of go in and out of people's lives and they don't get reported because they're really technically already missing in a lot of ways. But always the lack of pictures in between make me sad and make me wonder what happened and whether or not there was a mental health issue or what it was. But just when it comes to this, he was clearly a smart guy. He graduated from a technical college, and he likely should have been able to get a well-paying job. Something had to have happened. I did find a GoFundMe that is linked below that belonged to his children's ex, as well as her Facebook. They were hoping to raise money in order to have a service for him. It turns out that Jeremiah had 2 kids. His identity was actually confirmed by matching him with his oldest child. These kids thankfully do have a stepfather in their life, but they loved their father and they didn't know what happened to him. His ex, for her part, wanted it known that they loved and forgave their dad for whatever was going on in his life at the time. In the end, maybe that's what matters the most. A perhaps telling post is the one that I'm showing here. For privacy reasons, I'm not going to disclose her name or where. She went on to say that Jeremiah was one of her best friends, but that he was overwhelmed and his mind was rattled, suggesting that she'd seen him recently, saying that when she saw him, he had given her a pin that was gold in color and it was a crown of thorns. She would describe him as having a clearer mind. So from this, the takeaway is probably that he did have some mental health struggles, but he loved his boys and he was trying to do the best he could. Jeremiah Garretson went unidentified for 4 years. Had he lived, he would be 40 years old today. The Riverside County Jane Doe, identified as Juana Rosas-Zagal. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing, so my apologies to her family, and actually to the viewer who suggested this case to me before, who's related to her. I'm so bad at it, I feel like I shouldn't even cover them, but I don't want to leave them out either. This case actually starts in Beaumont, California, which is in Riverside County. This is going to be handled as an update because I was actually contacted last year by a relative of this Jane Doe. This young woman, Cecilia, was contacted by the police involving this case, as they found her during a DNA search. So while she couldn't provide help in solving the case, she still felt responsible for trying. So I'm going to run the original case right now. It's only 3 minutes, and then I will give you the update. Unidentified Jane Doe. The Riverside County Jane Doe, 1996. I was contacted by a relative of the Riverside Jane Doe, 1996. Cecilia found herself being contacted by a person who was doing genetic DNA research for this specific case. It turns out she was related, but she didn't know who this woman was. While she didn't know of anyone in her family that was missing, her DNA still may help solve the puzzle. That's why it's so important to upload your DNA. The story starts on January 27th, 1996, about 20 feet south of the eastbound 60 freeway. This was about a mile and a half east of Gilman Springs Road. The remains of a woman was found near some trash in a hilly area off Highway 60 near Beaumont, California. The woman was wearing a purple long-sleeved turtleneck shirt, blue pants, and a dark gray sweater. Her clothing was clean and well-maintained, so she likely wasn't homeless. The same goes for her dental care. She'd received dental care, and she was wearing quite a bit of jewelry, including a yellow metal wristwatch with a flower-shaped cover. It had multiple stones on top, with a red one in the center. There was what was described as a yellow metal ring with a clear stone on her left ring finger, and what's described as a gold pendant in the shape of a rose. I'm certainly not an expert, but I once had a Black Hills gold ring in the shape of a rose, and it looked exactly like this, which makes me think this could be Black Hills gold. There was also a necklace with what is described as gold Jesus and Virgin Mary pendant. Homicide investigators responded to the scene 26 years ago, finding her just hours after she passed due to a GS wound to the head. She suffered extensive trauma, and as a result, she wasn't visually identifiable. She was of Hispanic descent, and the two names that came up the most in her genetic DNA search was the surnames of Rivera and Duran, with Rivera being the one that came up the most. Her line of ancestors appear to have mainly originated in Durango, Mexico, eventually migrating to the United States, mostly within California. They believe the young woman was likely 30 to 45, which, if correct, would likely mean someone within the Rivera or Duran families are missing someone with a birth date ranging from about 1951 to 1966. She was around 5'1" and 130 pounds. They also noted that she'd had at least one child, as she had a cesarean scar. If anyone has any idea who she might be, please call the contact number on the screen or submit an anonymous tip. The tip link is given on the screen. The Riverside Jane Doe, 1996, has gone unidentified for 26 years. So I want to thank Cecilia again for doing all that she did to try to help get this solved, and for the fact that this person mattered to her. Tatham Labs provided the DNA and did the genetic genealogy investigation themselves. While they had to put the search on hold for more DNA uploads, Juana Rosas-Zagal was just 41 when her life was brutally stolen from her in January of 1996. Not only is it horrible she was abused so badly, but it rendered her facial features impossible to compare to missing persons. She was a 41-year-old mother of 4. We know that she was reported missing from the Los Angeles area, which is about 78 miles or 126 kilometers away from where she was found in Rosemont. She left behind 4 daughters who have been missing her for the last 27 years, wanting nothing more than knowing where their mother was. This was a particularly brutal and hateful crime. If anyone has any information, they really need someone to come forward. Her daughter would give this statement: "He destroyed my family. He didn't only one person. He all of us," saying that she really needs to know who did this. Juana Rosas-Zagal went unidentified for 27 years. Had she lived the life she deserved, she would be 68 years old today. The West Haven Jane Doe, also known as the New Haven County Jane Doe, identified as Sarah Tatham Abbott, who went by the name of Sally. On April 20th, 1979, in West Haven, Connecticut, which is in New Haven County, partial skeletal remains were found on a property that was just adjacent to Route 34 and Derby Avenue. This was on a property that was owned by New Haven Water Company. In addition to the remains, they found a black lace bra, a West Clocks folding travel alarm, and a hard red case, which you can see here. 2 years and 4 days later, on April 24th, 1981, they would find the missing mandible, and it was located in that same area. But of course, some of the remains were missing. The COD just couldn't be determined. The examination would indicate she was 5'1" to 5'3", or 155 to 160 centimeters. But her weight, her hair color, and her eyes, that was all unknown. Which, of course, in these cases, doesn't help with making any sort of identification. It didn't help that they didn't have any sort of a postmortem interval. They didn't know how long she'd been there. They thought maybe 1 to 8 years. But that, of course, also makes it harder to match up with missing persons. We know now that it was likely 9 years. But it's pretty amazing how close they come with a lot of these. They released that she had periodontal disease, as well as some fillings. They estimated her to be in her teens to early 20s, and the best clue that she had been born missing a lower vertebrae, and likely despite her young age, she had arthritis in her back that probably caused her a bit of pain. They did multiple recreations over the years, but those led nowhere. In the end, the only thing that did lead to a name was Tatham Labs, and the magic that they perform pretty regularly on bones. And in this case, it was bones that were out in the sun for almost a decade. Previously, this wouldn't have yielded DNA, so what they've been able to do has been groundbreaking. We know now that her name was Sarah Tatham Abbott, and that her family called her Sally. Sally was a little bit older than projected, but not by a lot. She was 29 years old when she disappeared in July of 1970. I always feel like I have to pay tribute to the fact that their family went on for 5 decades, trying to figure out what happened to somebody that they loved. In almost all of these stories, there's families behind them just like this. Sally was from the same county where she was found. She went missing from New Haven and was found in West Haven, and the difference is about 5 miles or 8 kilometers. It's clear from the articles that she was reported missing also, and the police were actively looking for her. And in fact, generations of police officers would take up the search for her. So when I say they were actively looking for her, it was a lot of people. So it's crazy that this wasn't matched up. Things were just a lot harder then than they are now, as far as trying to make those matches. Because her bones don't indicate anything definitive, it's impossible to tell if it was accidental or someone did something to her. So this, of course, needs someone to come forward who may possibly know what was going on in her life at the time. Detectives have asked that anyone with information call 203-937-3905. Sally Abbott was a missing person for 53 years and an unidentified Jane Doe for 44. Had she lived, she would be 82 years old today. The Schiphol John Doe, identified as Bernard Luza. Schiphol, Amsterdam is in the Netherlands, and it has me a little bit confused. It appears the name is derived from a former armed forces base that was part of the defense line of Amsterdam. But now it's identified as the location of the airport. If anyone lives overseas and knows more about this, it would be awesome if you would comment. Sometimes some of the non-American cases are a little bit harder for me, but they're really interesting. And this is a very interesting case. In 1911, the Kattenberg family was already a known name in the garment industry. They opened the Hollandia Kattenberg Garment Factory in Amsterdam North, and in it they were making waterproof raincoats made of rubber-coated fabric. And this began even before World War II. Hollandia Kattenberg was considered one of the most advanced as well as largest garment factories in all of Europe. The Second World War began in 1939, and by 1940, this particular factory had 740 employees, and quite a few of them were Jewish. The country was considered neutral, but it was invaded by evil men from Germany. I'm not sure how to address them on here because if I use the N-word, they're going to suppress this video. But obviously you all know who I'm talking about as the evil group of men from Germany during World War II. So because I have to call them something, I'm going to just refer to them as evil occupiers, or EO for short. The EO began systematically deporting Dutch Jews to camps in Germany and Poland, and these of course were occupied by the EO. It would turn out that 70% of the country's Jewish population perished during the war, which is a much higher percentage than Belgium or France. Declassified records revealed that the EO had paid a bounty to Dutch police, and those officials would locate and identify Jewish persons. And this is what led to such a higher rate of people perishing. Despite what was going on elsewhere in the Netherlands, Jewish employees, though, at this factory were considered safe. And this was a huge relief for the workers as well as their families. Despite the fact that the EO had been deporting those they were able to identify as Jewish, these employees were given a provisional exemption from this. They couldn't be deported, nor could their immediate family members. So working here was considered a bit of a blessing. But the work they did here required some skills and was considered important. Although in November of 1940, all of the Jewish directors that were in high positions in this particular factory, they were forced to resign and they were replaced by non-Jewish managers. Although the Jewish employees who were non-management level, they were still safe. The exemption still stood. And this particular factory was filling a lot of German manufacturing commissions, and that just elevated how important they were because of this. However, the evil occupiers, or the EO as I'm calling them, they were considered very unhappy about this. What they cared about was quotas they had for how many people they captured and deported. And these particular quotas at the time weren't being met. So they would come up with a scheme to make a sweep of Jewish employees under the guise of saying that they violated the provisional exemptions. Although from what I can tell, this was just barely based on fact. There was a resistance group in the country trying to save everybody from the EO. and one of those in this group was arrested. This man's name was Samuel Dormans, and he went by the name of Sally. Sally Dormans had a notebook of names. Everyone listed in this book was Jewish, except for a woman named Martha. Dormans had briefly worked at the factory, and he was taken in by the EO and brutally interrogated. During this interrogation, he would claim that a large number of Jewish workers at the factory were working together to try to undermine the EO. It's not known if he made it all up, and probably some workers were part of the resistance, but it's likely he exaggerated in order to save himself, and it's possible nothing he said was true. We know that he no longer worked at the factory, and that he had just for a short time until he himself was fired in May of 1941, over a year earlier. It's unclear why he was fired, but it's entirely possible that he held a grudge. Either way, the EO would take him to the factory on November 11th, 1942. It was at this point the Jewish workers were separated and the non-Jewish workers were sent home. Sally would then start to point out people that he claimed were part of the resistance and were involved in acts of sabotage. At the time, there were 367 Jewish employees, and he would point out 130, which just from my point of view seems incredibly large for someone who didn't work there long, couldn't have known very many people. The people that he identified were then sent to a penitentiary, described as saboteurs. Their families, too, were all swept up, detained, and deported. There were 820 of them in total. And the treatment of the penitentiary that the people who were swept up were in, outside of the families who were obviously deported to the worst place you could be deported during that war. But the treatment in the penitentiary that's described was so brutal that I can't even say it here. So maybe, in the case of Sally, the pain was so bad that this was the only way to make it stop. I don't know. But it seems incredibly unfair. It would be pointed out later that not one employee from the factory had a name that appeared in Sally Dormant's list of resistors. So it's believed that it's highly unlikely any of them actually did the crime that they were accused of. By the end of the war, over 100,000 Dutch persons found themselves deported for the accused crime of simply being Jewish. Not all of these factory workers were deported, however. Our John Doe today was one of those who didn't make it onto a train. He was sentenced to perish by squad on February 15, 1943. He would appeal, but it was rejected, and of course, the process of appeal was likely more of a sham in the first place anyway. Our John Doe was buried alongside 3 other factory workers in a makeshift grave. On June 19, 1945, some excavation work was being done in the area where the 4 men were found. 2 of the people were identified early on as Thaddeus Kramer and Carol Abraham. A 3rd man would be identified in 2013 as Nicholas Vanderhorst. Our John Doe, however, was still not named, but they didn't give up trying. They would use genetic genealogy, and in 2023, the Dutch Defense Ministry Forensic Unit would find his cousin living in Australia. Once again, Bernard Luza had his name. Bernard's wife, Clara, and their young daughter, Eva, passed away at the camp they were sent to. Bernard's father, Solomon, and 5 of Bernard's brothers and sisters met a similar fate at a different camp. One of his siblings, however, survived, and she immigrated to Australia after the war. It was her son who had identified him. Some of the articles named Bernard as a resistance leader, which my own research makes me believe is misleading. This seems to stem from the accusation rather than the proof. Although it does appear he at some point confessed, but it's probably more likely it was a false confession due to the abuse he was being submitted to in order to get him to admit it. Bernard was born 119 years ago, and he was 39 when his life was so unfairly taken in 1943. Bernard Luza went unidentified for 78 years. The Dunn Jane Doe, identified as Victoria Delores Mejia-Peredes. In July of 1999, a man was out riding his ATV in a wooded area near Dunn, North Carolina. It was here that they found the remains of a woman who had likely been there for a couple of months. This was described as being about 100 yards from the Inez labor camp. In North Carolina, there are reportedly many different labor camps where the itinerant farm workers stay. One study concluded that poor housing conditions exist but are often hidden in the area, so there's a lot of farm worker labor camps. They need these people to come in and work the land, but there's really no place for them to stay. It reportedly increases farm worker vulnerability, adding that agriculture itself in that area can be a hazardous job. However, the job industry is dependent on migrant workers who come in. But of course, the workers need to work and the industry itself relies on these workers. And because they're hidden, usually these camps are pretty hazardous. And in this case, it was off a road ironically titled Easy Street. Because this area has people coming and going, it was nearly impossible to identify her. Additionally, they would say that it was known that escort workers would sometimes come to the camp. So they didn't know if she was someone who'd been staying there, if she was a partner of someone working in the area, or if she had come there for that reason and something happened to her. There were unfortunately a lot of what ifs, and they weren't able to identify her at all. Her COD was a slashed throat. She had no identification found near her, nor could they ever discover her identity. They believed she was either not quite an adult or as old as 24 with long red hair. They obtained DNA and fingerprints, but there was no match. And of course, it doesn't help that a lot of these people in these camps were from other countries. Some here legally and others not. And of course, for those who are not, missing people aren't generally reported. The police tracked down missing person reports for decades in trying to identify her as a cold case. They would eventually reach out to the Sampson County Sheriff, and a grant would eventually help provide genetic genealogy. Eventually, the Kinfinder group was hired to do the genetic search, and the DNA testing itself was done by Astria Forensics. They would begin the process in January of 2022, with the identification not happening until August of 2023. These cases always take a long time when trying to work through the DNA when there aren't close matches in genetic genealogy. They approach someone who's on that tree, who sends them to somebody else, another test is done, and they keep working their way forward. The DNA itself came from a hair sample, in this case. They would come across the surname of Paredes, which I'm sorry, I'm probably saying wrong, eventually identifying a family from Honduras with several members that were now located inside of the U.S. As they worked it, they came across a parent-child match between our Jane Doe and a young woman who would eventually be identified as the daughter of Victoria. And her daughter by this time was living in a home in California. We know now that Victoria was just 21 and still living in Honduras with her family in 1999. She began a relationship with Beardo Meza, and the two had this daughter who would eventually help identify her mom. It would turn out that he was living in a small town in North Carolina, Rose Hill, that had just over 1,000 people, and he arranged for Victoria to come to the United States, and at some point they would have a child. It's not clear exactly who raised her child, but it was not the boyfriend. He would actually go back to Honduras in April of 2000. Her family was frantic, and they kept begging him to tell them what happened to Victoria. But all he would say is that she left him and he didn't know where she was. Complicating matters, he would pass away himself in Honduras around 2000 or 2001. Victoria was never reported missing, probably because she wasn't in the U.S. legally and her family didn't want to cause trouble. It's unfortunately a common theme, and there's a lot of people here in the U.S. that are from other countries that have not been identified. The picture of Victoria shown here was not enhanced by me. I do use an AI program sometimes, but this one did a better job, probably, than mine does, but at the same time, it's probably not quite accurate. It sort of depicts what it feels the features would be, so it's always a little bit off. For some reason, the sheriff's office doesn't have her listed as foul play and isn't naming the boyfriend, although he's already passed, so maybe it doesn't matter. But that said, someone clearly took her life, and it's unfortunate it's not listed as such. But anyone with any information on this case still is urged to call the Sampson County Sheriff's Office at 910-592-4141. Victoria went unidentified for 24 years, 3 years longer than she got to spend on this earth. Had she lived the life she deserved, she would be 45 years old today. The Butte John Doe, identified as Michael Wayne, Canada. 2 hikers north of Butte, Montana, near the tiny town of Walkersville, were walking their dog in 2012 when they found a garbage bag off to the side of the road. They decided to see what was inside, and inside were the legs of a man who'd passed away just a few days earlier. Investigators were able to tell there was a metal rod in one of the legs from some sort of an injury, and whoever had placed him in the bag had done so just a few days before he was discovered. They searched and searched the area, but they found no more remains. And because they only found part of him, no COD was even able to be determined. Not very often do I get to cover cases where I've been, although while I've been to Butte many times, I've never even heard of Walkerville. So I feel like just because I can, I need to paint a quick picture of the area, and it's a tiny town, which for Montana is obviously a pretty normal thing. We're an agricultural state, and we have a lot of small towns, and there's often a wide stretch of land between places. Butte is really interesting because, as you can see here, the Berkeley Pit is a big deal. The Berkeley Pit was a copper pit that operated from 1955 to 1982. It was actually an open mine rather than an underground mine. When the pit was closed, they turned the water pumps off and it started filling up with water. Rather than clean up the site, they just abandoned it. And as a result, there were a lot of mesothelioma cases in the area. It actually turned into a sort of toxic wasteland. Even birds in the area were being poisoned. But the crazy thing about this, and because it's kind of cool, I wanted to mention it, is they found over 142 organisms living inside the pit, and they were able to isolate 80 chemical compounds that exist nowhere else outside of this specific pit. And because of this, they believe the microbes that they found will at some point in the future be able to fight illness in others. It's now a super fun site that's being cleaned up, but from all the bad, something kind of cool happened. The town itself has a population of around 35,000 people, and the town nearby, Walkerville, had about 645 people living in it when he was found. This was just outside of town, only about 2 miles or 3 kilometers. The weird thing about this case, too, is that one portion of his body was still clothed, wearing Dickies brand white socks, jeans, and Red Wing hiking boots. But it wasn't obviously enough to go by, and they can't do a recreation. So as their hands were tied, it came down to DNA and Othram Labs, which finally gave this man his name back. Michael Wayne Canada was 46 when he went missing in 2010, which was about 2 years before his legs were found. They don't believe he'd been there that long, though, so where he was in those 2 years is not known. It's not clear exactly where he went missing from initially. They do know shortly before he went missing, he'd been working at a grocery store in Butte. And we know now that the pin found in his leg was due to a serious motorcycle accident that he was in. Michael himself is described as a drifter, and that was in part why his family had no idea where he was. Michael Wayne Canada was missing for 13 years, and an unidentified John Doe for 11. Had he lived, he'd be 59 years old today. The Clinton Jane Doe, identified as Carol Snyder. Carol Snyder was last seen in Richardson, Texas, on June 16, 1982. She was reported missing, and she had a profile listed on the Charlie Project that was made in 2004. And 1 year later, in 2005, they would update her profile with an age-progressed photo. The authorities at that time reported that they believed she had been taken against her will. In 2005, Carol would have been 43. Her family, over the years, held out hope that she'd be found. At the time, the young woman was 5'1" and 180 pounds, or 155 centimeters and 82 kilograms. I decided to flip this case and start with her disappearance because it highlights the reason some of these cases went unidentified. What Carol Snyder's family did not know, and what authorities didn't match up, was that the remains of a woman were found 5 days after she went missing, and the postmortem interval was listed as 4 days to 2 weeks, meaning it was probably the day she went missing. However, they would report the person was mid-teens to 50 and 5'8". 7 inches, or about 18 centimeters, is a pretty big difference. And because of this mistake, her family would likely go 4 decades without answers. It doesn't help, of course, that she was found in Cordell, Oklahoma, and Richardson, Texas is about a 4-hour drive away. Maybe even without the mistake, she would have gone unidentified because of the difference in location. But then again, as I said, she was put in on the Charlie Project, and she had been there for a long time. Her remains were entered into NamUs in 2009. which was after her missing person report was entered into the database. So maybe with the correct height, it was unlikely it would be matched in 1981, but much more likely 14 years ago when the NamUs profile went up. So these mistakes do matter. Her COD is a gunshot wound. Whoever did this is still out there, so somebody needs to come forward in this case to give information about what was going on at the time. Carol Sue Snyder went unidentified for 41 years. Had she lived the life she deserved, she would be 62 years old today. The Hartford John Doe, identified as Francis Patrick Fitzpatrick. This case begins in November of 1983 in Hartford County, Connecticut. It was here that a person was found near the river in Great Meadows, which is a salt marsh that is located along the coast of Connecticut. They estimated him to be white and between the ages of 30 and 60. He'd likely been there for several months, but even that estimate was hard to make due to the weather. They also had a difficult time concluding what his COD was. With him were 3 General Motors keys, a Sanyo brand digital watch that had a silver stretch band, a tan wool jacket, a blue shirt, tan pants, and shoes that were described as loafers. Then a person came into the picture that likely fits well along those of us who are interested in these particular cases. Sometimes referred to as armchair detectives who try to match up missing people with Jane and John Doe cases. It takes a lot of patience, and I've tried this, and I discovered I'm not good at it. But the amazing thing is others are, and cases have been solved because of this. Random strangers who care, and they come up with the correct matching combination. And in this case, enter Jean Aote. She would describe herself as a true crime fan, and she had a habit of spending weekends poring over police files and message boards in hopes of solving a case. Jean had attended multiple CrimeCon conventions. At one of them, she lost a bid at a chance for a private CSI tour at Tatham Labs. She decided she wasn't going to miss it again, and in this case, she bid $3,000 for a private tour, and she won. She loved the tour, and this would just increase her interest in genetic genealogy and all of the good that it can do. She works as a real estate paralegal, and she would use her own funds to donate the $7,000, in this case, needed for DNA and genetic genealogy. Because of her, as well as the magic of Tatham Labs, we now know that Francis Patrick Fitzpatrick was 43 when he was last seen by his family in Springfield, Massachusetts, and this was in 1983. This means he would have been 44 when he passed away. It was the DNA of his son that would eventually provide the match that brought his dad home, ending nearly 4 decades of a mystery his family had been trying to solve. The medical examiner had ruled that Francis took his own life. If anyone's feeling hopeless in the United States, the helpline to call is 988. It will connect the person to the closest local chapter. There is no shame in feeling hopeless, and there is someone available to speak to if you need to reach out. Francis Patrick Fitzpatrick has gone unidentified for 39 years. Had he lived, he would be 83 years old today. Huge thanks for watching all the way to the end, and a big thanks to all of you who consistently like and comment on the videos. Whether you leave a full comment or an emoji, it makes a huge difference. So if you consistently watch my videos, maybe take a moment to subscribe. It's a huge push toward the videos being suggested to new people. The next goal is 20,000. Thanks everyone for watching. Take care of yourselves and each other.